Hi, we are going live again for a great Sistr webinar with a really fiery, opinionated, great group of women. I mean that in a good way. That's the thing, isn't it? When you say a woman's opinionated, everyone takes offense. And actually, I think I take it as a compliment. Whereas men would go, yay, we're opinionated, we're strong. Amazing, smashing, gender bias panel. And the diversity in this panel is huge, and probably the biggest diverse panel we've had, which just shows what a massive subject it is, and complex subject, because we've got everything. We've got Amy, who, honestly, where do I start with your bio? Sociologist, poet, author, consultant, everything to do with diversity and inclusion. LinkedIn top 2020 voice. So that's, where the opinionated and gobby, and in a good way, comes in. You always make me laugh when I see your posts, and I'm like, it's not just me. And then the amazing Cynthia, again, massive diversity, inclusion, LGBT. I always forget, and I apologize, because other letters keep getting added to the LGBT. So what's the full line for what you specialize in?
The full line is 29 characters and counting. So yeah, it's
still all right to say LGBT plus.
LGBT plus is the shortest version you can do, and the plus is important compared to an asterisk. So
yeah, because that includes everything, doesn't it? So amazing coach and consultant, and then Jackie, otherwise known as Jackie Big Tits, which is key to a lot of the story we're going to go into, and owning it and backing yourself, podcaster, journalist, spokesperson, and just an amazing woman. And then the lovely Julia Elliott Brown, who serial entrepreneur, founder of Enter the Arena, and a real campaigner in helping female founders find their voice, learn about investment, just get going in a very unequal society when it comes to anything to do with female investors within female founded businesses. So just in that introduction, the diversity involved in introducing you all. But just a question to all of you to start with, and let's go Cynthia first. What are your first experiences of bias in your world?
Well, for me, as a woman with a transgender history, it wasn't the moment that one of my male colleagues at the time came up to me, did the elbow at the photocopier and said, there is no such thing as male privilege. It actually happened a little while later, where it actually relates to safety. And it was simply learning that walking down the street was no longer something I could do without thought, and realizing that rather than just walk down a street or a back alley or so forth, to look down the street, see who's coming, who's on what side of the street, who's in front of me, who's behind me, what shoes am I wearing? Can I lose these shoes? Can I use them as a weapon? Right? Those were never thoughts in my head, but now it is part of every day of just simply walking out the front door. And that for me was the shock of, oh gosh, I'm no longer safe anymore.
Yeah, I always had my did anyone do the key when you're out walking with you? If you're coming back after a pub or something, you just put a key with the sharp bit up, just so if anyone comes, you go. I was teaching a few teenage daughters of friends of mine that last week. But yeah, exactly. That's just to have to think about that. And what about you, Jackie?
I think for me, I think just existing as a Black woman, the kind of stereotypes that surround Blackness and being a Black woman, and being judged before you open your mouth based on, negative stereotypes. And that has been from as long as I can remember. I've always been told, when I was about 10 years old, my mum sort of gave me the talk, which a lot of Black people have with their parents, where your parents essentially say to you, you are going to be treated differently based on the colour of your skin. And so that has something, and then obviously then being a woman as well, that has obviously given me, you know, double bias. And yeah, but again, I'm very much about trying to kind of spin that on its head and trying to find some positivity in that. And, you know, I'm always aim to try and be the change that I wish to see in the world. So, you know, I'm not letting that destroy me, but if anything, fuel me.
Yeah, it's fueling that fire, isn't it? Well, Julia, you've had in the business world, and I know you've got a fire in there. And I would say that it's like, right, I've still got a load more people to, yeah, prove wrong. And just to show them every time someone says you can't do it or treat you like a female, you're like, right, watch this. But Julia, what in the business world and working with female founders, and or what your personal first experiences and realizing actually there's a problem here?
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about my personal experiences, which is really what drove me to set up into the arena in the first place. But with my last business, which was a fashion tech company, I started with my sister, where you could design your own shoes. You know, we started that business with no fear, believing we could do anything. And then along the way, definitely experienced that kind of gender bias in raising investment. So I think the first thing was when we got a bank loan quite early on, and I'll never forget the bank manager coming to the house for a meeting, and he sort of sat in my kitchen, looked around, he said, "Oh, this is a very nice kitchen extension. Is this what you spent your business loan on?" I just remember thinking, what the, you know, like, seriously, another man, and just lots of questions about, oh, so what does your husband do, and all that kind of stuff. That was the first bit, and then when we went out to raise investment from, you know, proper investors who were buying equity in our business, I don't think I ever met a female investor. All we talked to were men. They didn't really, they'd ask me questions like, shoes, really? Is there a market in shoes? Do people, you know? I'll be like, hello, have you looked in my wardrobe and have you looked in your wife's wardrobe? Yes, there, you know, but they just couldn't get it because it wasn't, you know, they do this pattern matching thing, you know, where they just kind of don't recognize themselves in you, and so they just don't get it. Yeah. And lots of questions like, you know, so are you working part-time on this business? You know, that kind of assumption that because I was a woman, I was building a business that was a kind of, you know, back bedroom, kitchen table type business, that it was just a hobby. I think, and that assumption before you've even walked in the room was really quite shocking. So yeah, Emma, absolutely. I'm one of those people that as soon as you give me any challenge like that, I'm like, I will show you all. And we raised a couple of £1 million for that business, so and learned a lot along the way. But yeah, loads of gender bias, loads.
Yeah, and you, Amy, your focus? You're very passionate, about it.
I'm just angry. I just spend my days in this state of like increasing perpetual anger. But I didn't, like in my early 20s, and I feel embarrassed about this now, I just didn't see it. I didn't see gender bias. I also have like a working class chip on my shoulder, but I didn't even see it then. But I've worked in advertising since forever, for like the last 17 years. It's quite well known for being quite toxic as an industry, very male-led, very white male-led, obviously, you know, harking back to the Mad Men days. And I started to realize as I started to get senior, and I became senior quite quick, I guess because I am Gobby and now all those things. I started to see that in industries like advertising, but also in life, women aren't allowed to speak. And there's all these different ways that we're not allowed to speak. We're interrupted the whole fucking time. In meetings, I was talking really fast so that people didn't so that I could get my point out. We're asked for our opinion less. Like over the years, I've just noticed it more and more and more. And now everything I do is about letting people speak or enabling people to speak who aren't allowed to traditionally by the ruling class of white men. So that's why I created something called DICE, which stands for Diversity and Inclusion at Conferences and Events, which is all about giving people a platform that don't traditionally have a platform. So you'll see, like on LinkedIn, all I do is just scream for me, but on behalf of everyone else, so that, you know, everyone actually listens.
I know, it's funny. I'll put something over there and I'm like, fuck's sake, not again. Like, it's like lineups of just, you know, amazing event, and there's like eight heads on there, and it's just all white.
Man,
with one token female white on it.
yeah. That's I exist to eradicate Wannel. Or actually the Wannel, because it's not just men, it's all white men, all white middle class men, all white middle class straight men.
Exactly, but then they then go, right, we're being diverse by putting a straight middle class white woman in the mix that adds the add, and that, as far as they're concerned, that's diversity.
Yeah.
Which is but on that, and actually Jackie and Cynthia, on the advice towards marginalized groups, to being in, and we were saying before we went live that, you know, I always say I never got the female memo when I've launched, and that's the only, that's the only box I tick in the marginalized group category, you know what I mean? So I'm like private school, white, posh. It's sort of the only box that I tick in my life and have ticked is I have a vagina box, and that so I can learn. I've been trying to learn a lot in the last, you know, year and a bit of just sort of listening, as you said, just listening to understand where my unconscious bias is, where it's in there. It's in there, it's just sort of figuring it out. And so from Cynthia and Jackie, your point of view is your advice and experience on that for marginalized groups of because a lot of women are like, well, we're women too, we've been marginalized. You're like, no, you've got to listen as well, shut up. So Jackie, what do you think?
Well, I think that my favorite, you know, quote is, you know, if your feminism isn't intersectional, then it's not feminism. I think like intersectionality is so important when we talk about you know, racial bias, because, you know, I think it's about listening and amplifying those voices. So it's also about learning about the barrier. So I will speak specifically from my experience as Black women, but it's about, you know, other people non-white people, white people, learning about the barriers to success that Black people face on a daily basis and explore how you can dismantle that. And it's using your privilege to, you know, challenge data, for example. So as a white woman, okay, these are the obstacles against me, but then if I'm not white, then what are the obstacles against those women? And it's looking, you know, it's also like looking at those different kind of things and really like interrogating your own thoughts. And because obviously Black women face like unfair expectations, unique challenges. You know, we have biased assumptions about where we fit in the workplace, for example, when it comes to our hair. You know, the way your hair is determines the way you'll be treated. So me having like, you know, a long wig would be different to if I have braids, you know, that, or if I have my afro out, you know, and there's been so much around hair discrimination and, you know, and being Black and, you know, what hair is acceptable when, you know, all of it should be acceptable because it's your hair and it's coming out your head. But yeah, it's about amplifying and, you know, speaking up. I think when it comes to specifically race, it's uncomfortable. It's not meant to be pleasant. It's not supposed to be easy. But if we want change, you know, it has to be uncomfortable. So it's also, I think, if you are, you know, a white person and you want to do more and help, you know, marginalized voices, it's about putting, I guess, you know, discomfort to the side and defensiveness, and not taking it as things as a personal attack, but actually we're all trying to fight against the same system, and seeing it that way. So yeah, and I think anti-racist work is lifetime's work. So I don't think anyone is, you know, wins the gold medal for being the best anti-racist person on earth. It's a journey, but I think, you know, the most important thing to do is start, and, you know, kind of open doors, open rooms. If, you know, if you're in certain rooms that, you know, marginalized voices are not in, speak for us so that we can come in, you know. So yeah, I think for me it's about collaboration and just amplifying voices.
And Cynthia?
Yeah. You know, it's a tough one because I get to check a whole bunch of boxes, but, you know, when I hear someone like Jackie speak, there's also a whole series of experiences, I haven't had myself. And so, to what Jackie was saying, it for me was the awareness, I think, that everyone has to challenge and realize your own privilege. And I mean, you've talked about, a bit of recognizing your own, but for me, the lesson that's kind of come through the process of being aware of privilege is when you realize you have privilege, it is to use that privilege not to speak for others, but to create spaces and uplift others to speak for themselves. Now, they can certainly choose and ask me to speak on their behalf, but the reality is my job as carrying privilege, in my case, white privilege, is to simply, create spaces and uplift, not to speak for. And, I would say that within the LGBT plus community, it's the same thing. It's like, if you're not seeing the representation and you realize, okay, I'm straight, I live in that, I have no idea what experience they might be going through, then that's simply, how do we actually create this opportunity to uplift and give them a voice to be heard? Because, they might actually have something worthwhile to contribute to the conversation. So for me, that's really the biggest piece that comes in. And I have a whole philosophy that I won't dive into, but it's about acceptance. And acceptance means seeing the human first, not the difference. And that's what I try and teach and to work with folks, is see the human first. And that's why when we talk about in coaching, you try and uplift someone in order to find their human potential, not their women potential, not their, color of skin or the religious. It's their human potential, because we're all human. That's our commonality.
Yeah, that's why I when the whole futures female thing, when everyone's having the t-shirt and people are like, well, are you gonna get that tattooed? Have you got one of those t-shirts? And I was always like, no, because it's not. The future isn't female. I've always gone, the future is human. It's always just been how I've thought is it's just exactly that. It's humans. And that brings on to the whole, with diversity, everyone's very quick to get on genders and race, but the whole cognitive neurodiversity is massive as well. And I think people can look, you're so intent on going, well, I need more BAME or I need more females, but actually sometimes you still end up in an echo chamber of the same the same thought process and the same cognitive diversity within people. And I know, Amy, you're big on this and the misfits and the weirdos. And so what's your experience on that? Because I mean, Steve Jobs is one of the ones who wanted the crazy ones and the misfits, but actually it's Julia's like Amazon arriving. So Amy, what's when it comes to neurodiversity, your advice on that?
Yeah. So to give a bit more context, about 18 months ago, I founded DICE, and DICE is like an educational charter to help events organizers and conference curators produce fully inclusive events, events that feel inclusive, events that listen to every voice, and so on. There's some optics that are obvious, like when someone's like gender, race, etc. When you're creating something that looks inclusive, but actually to make an event feel inclusive is far harder. And the charter that we've created is based on the Equality Act, which has 9 protected characteristics, which are the various different ways that it's actually illegal to actively discriminate against people. And so we make recommendations based on those 9 protected characteristics, like look for case studies that aren't just about, in the advertising space, that aren't just about 18-year-old men. Think about the LGBTQ plus community when you're talking about brands and content and all that stuff. And the area that always gets ignored is disability and neurodiversity, because accessibility is a faff. People don't, it's a lot of effort to have subtitles on your content when we're doing virtual events. People don't think to, wonder if their venue's accessible. Having a person doing sign language is expensive. And if you don't always have people with a disability attending your event, it's so easy to forget it. And then also neurodiversity is, for the most part, invisible. People don't often declare it, and so it just gets ignored. And it's such a frustration. So I wrote a newsletter about people saying they want misfits and weirdos in their workplace, in their like recruitment ad. And that pains me so much that people use that language when we're not creating workplaces. It's something like 80% of neurodivergent individuals in the UK don't have a job. People aren't creating really welcome spaces for individuals with ADD, dyspraxia, autism, because we just don't. A lot of people, to conclude, a lot of people care about the stuff they can see and the stuff that's easy, but very rarely do they take the time to empathize with, you know, people's brains and how people feel.
Yeah, I like that. That was always one of my favorite quotes, that the Steve Jobs one, until you then look into it more of it. It's still that the square pegs and round holes, isn't that? But on the, so Cynthia, you've got experience in the board, like in the boardroom, and that the bias, the gender bias you face, and that's, you know, that's a complete mix of neurodiversity and you know, echo chambers that go on in boardrooms, and Julia, you know, as well. So what, Cynthia, what's your experience on that front?
It's intriguing because when I entered the boardroom as myself, we had a 50-50 split of male, female, gender around the board table. So yay. I help balance the gender. So that's kind of fun. But, you know, we actually had a practice of really having a scrum on ideas as you're kind of working through a strategy, or perhaps you have a hot problem that you're trying to solve, that we would end up kind of, you know, having a scrum around the table, throwing ideas, the whole bit. And obviously, as the executive in charge of technology, I ended up usually having a lot to input because it's kind of important to business these days. And when I entered my very first board meeting as myself, the meeting was going fine. We got to a scrum and I threw out the idea on the table. Dead silence. The male counterpart beside me, who was a really good friend, restated my idea, and all of a sudden everybody was over that idea like crazy. And it was like, oh my God, that's a great idea, the whole bit. Now, you know, I'm sitting there faced with, do I go, excuse me, that was my idea? And then I would just be a little prissy because, you know, I need to take credit for that. Or because it was actually a technology idea, I would be responsible to implement it anyway. And I thought it was a good idea. So maybe I just need to support it and run with it. Because at that point, I didn't realize that as a woman in the boardroom, I actually need an ally in the men in there who can ensure that when my voice is not heard and it's skipped over, that they can speak up to say, I'm sorry, I think Cynthia had made a point. Can we unpack it, please? And make sure that I'm heard. And it's really sad that we need that, but even at the boardroom level, that's what I found is needed. And as I've worked with many other women, we found that to be an effective strategy of trying to align it. Now, thankfully, the male counterpart, he actually knew what he was doing and did that to uplift the idea because he thought I had a great idea. I asked him privately afterwards, I says, you know, can you just kind of, you know, let me know if you're trying to kind of, you want to build off that idea, or are you trying to, you know, reinforce my idea? So maybe can you just, you know, proceed it with, you know, I think Cynthia had a really great idea. What I heard her say is this. And that way it amplifies my voice and they're still hearing him, which allows the idea to be heard. But yeah, it was after that that I realized that I had lost my voice around the boardroom table unless I had a male counterpart who was reinforcing it.
Yeah, the mansplaining, it's big, isn't it? But do you know, when I grew up, my mum used to say, if you want something done, you've got to make your father think it's his idea. It was always something I had to do, like growing up, and I became really good at it, and I still do it in the workplace. But I shouldn't have to do it. You know what I mean? That's what's so. It was a standing joke in the family, and it's still there. And it's still the way I operate a lot on that. But it's if I want something done, should I position it so that they come out? And I still see I'm doing it with guys that I work with. It's kind of, rather than going, right, it's kind of positioning it so, and then they go, and you think, what a great idea. And you just, in my head, I've kind of softened it to go, well, at least it's getting done. But it shouldn't really be like that, should it? It's like, Julia, what's your experience? You must have seen that loads.
What you say is a great example of the fact that we need those people with privilege, i.e. the men who already have that voice, to take the position and bring us up. And I think the danger of this echo chamber thing is that we're in one right now. You know, all people that get diversity piece with an audience who are interested in the diversity piece talking to each other, probably more important than we talk to those people who don't get it yet, to bring them on board. I mean, I think in the startup world, in startup companies, what's quite interesting is you have a real diversity issue there too, because Emma, you may agree with this, that when you're in a startup environment, you tend to recruit people who are like you, like-minded souls who are all, you know, pushing towards this dream. And suddenly you can find that you've got a 20-person organization, and you know, it can either be all women or all men or all whatever, but you're creating another echo chamber, and it can be quite hard to address diversity at that point. Smaller organizations find it hard to kind of make the allowances for people, for example, with neurodiverse people. So it's just as much of a challenge in smaller companies as it is in big ones, I think.
Yeah.
Did you find that?
No, massively. And we've actually, like, in the last sort of 3-4 years, really made a conscious effort. Because when you're going 3,000 miles per hour in a startup and you've got very limited funds and it's sort of to have someone, I sort of call them my gladiators. This sort of like with killing kittens, so I'm by my side charging at 3,000 miles per hour. It's a similar little group, and only now in the last 4 or 5 years, and we've got much more tech and diverse and like open, is that actually there's a real conscious effort to look externally and have really awkward conversations. Well, not awkward, but kind of where I have to stand back and go, initially you think I don't agree with that, and then I've got much better, really good in fact, of like just standing back, listening, and then going, actually they're right, they're totally right, I'm totally wrong on this one. And it's been it's been a fun learning process.
You've got kind of venture-backed businesses, so those high growth potential businesses like yours, Emma. The good investors, you know, the kind of institutions that are looking at diversity are starting to demand that the businesses they invest in are also looking at diversity. So I think when you get to that level, it becomes an issue that people care about. I think the challenge for lots of startups is when the first time you go out and get funding, it's usually from angel investors, so it's from individuals. And individual people who are wealthy don't have that diversity mandate in their head. They just don't. And so it's really hard when you're speaking to like 99% of people you speak to are men, old white men with grey hair. You know, that generational thing is also a massive issue. The younger generation get it, but when you speak to the older generation, who in our industry are often the ones that have the wealth, that need to flow to the younger people who are coming with ideas, there's a generational gap that has a huge biases involved. Yeah,
they really don't get the gender bias. I mean, even the other day, it was someone who was in his 70s, a surveyor to our house on the phone. I found out because my husband was away for a month, and he was like, "Well, when your husband gets back, I'll come. We'll speak." And I was like, "But I can." Yeah, but I can speak, or you can still come round next week. And he was like, "Well, let me know." And he goes, "Let me know when." And I just didn't want to fight it. And then when he did come around, when my husband was back, it took about half an hour before he actually would look me in the eye, because James actually let me speak. He knew it was going on. And it was one of the most hilarious like social experiments. I was just watching going, when is he going to acknowledge me? And it took my husband being completely silent and letting me do all the talking before suddenly this 70-year-old was sort of, okay, maybe I'll speak to little women. I'm involved. But it is... Jackie, in your podcasting world, there's quite a big sort of, there's a big sort of male. What's your experience in that?
Yeah, well, podcasting is still very much, a white man's game. So there was a study by Quartz which said like 480 top podcast hosts were men, and that only 1 in 3 were women, and that just over 1 in 10 were non-white, which obviously kind of includes me. So I think podcasting is an interesting one because it's such a fantastic comm strategy for any business. And also it's a really great way for women to share our stories. But I can understand, sexism being a factor where women don't want to put out content because they're worried about, whether people will listen to them, because it's still dominated by men. I think a lot of the time people are still used to men's voices. They're used to that type of storytelling, but actually we need more, diverse voices. Mainly, for example, I listen to podcasting because of storytelling, and a white man talking about walking home, from the pub in the dark would be different. It's like he might be like, oh, I was skipping home and it was dark. Whereas for us as women, it's like, well, that doesn't happen because I'm like hiding in between cars and stuff. So it's so important for like women, to, take up space. I think taking up space is key. Take up space in, the podcasting world. We just kind of have to break these barriers. And I think if you've got a story to tell, then nothing should stop you. I think there was, this hasn't happened to me, but last year, there was a podcast called the American Life Podcast. And the female hosts were attacked because people were saying, I say people, probably men, were saying that they were speaking in vocal fry, which is kind of like a higher pitched tone of voice associated with the Kardashians, etc., and saying that they couldn't take them seriously because that's what they sounded like. And it was really interesting because I was thinking, well, women are always policed on how we speak. It's like, if you're too assertive, then you're bossy, or if you're, and same with Hillary Clinton, she was called shrill or whatever, and shrieking and all this kind of words. It's almost used as like abusive language towards us as women. So, I think that, don't let that stop you. I don't let it stop me. I mean, my podcast is called Jackie Big Tits, and I say what I want. I'll talk about what I want. And that's how I choose to take up space, because I think, I'm tired of this phrase of, men take charge and women take care. It's like, no, women take charge too. And that's what I want to encourage any woman who is interested in podcasting to take up space. And also, who knows, we could encourage more men to listen to our experiences and stuff like that. So, and not just women. So yeah, I say take up space. And
because you think a lot of sorry to cut you over, there's a confidence gap, and that's, what I mean, it's like we will say the space isn't there and it's unfair and it's not, but actually how much of it is there an element of actually of putting ourselves out there, of not having that confidence, of being like, I know, Amy, you've looked at the perfect girl, right, and actually being imperfect and unapologetic. And you, Jack, that's the biggest, my advice would be, would just be unapologetic, have no shame, be unapologetic. And it's kind of the older I've got, the more of a less of a fuck I've given. And you look at it and go, we're, as women, we have that perfect good girl, to be absolutely perfect. By trying to be absolutely perfect, you lose the confidence, don't you? Because you're worrying too much about what, and like Amy, I've read something you done there, that imperfect versus perfect.
I run this it's like a training course, I guess, called Practice Makes Unperfect, because I wanted to help fix the problem of not enough women talking on stages across every industry. And I spoke to loads of events organisers, and there is a sad reality that women do say yes less, or they need to know that there's no one else more qualified than them to speak at a conference on a particular subject. And also they pull out more of stuff like this, like panels where there's a bit of spontaneity and where there's more room to fuck up. And so there is a confidence gap. There absolutely is, and a self-esteem gap. But what I say to the women that I teach, so I help them do writing, panel practice, presenting practice, just to boost their confidence about being themselves on stage, not being this shitty, perfect, like Stepford wife version that they think they should be. But there is a confidence gap, but it's not women's fault. That's the most important thing that I say to women, is that there's so much, on Jackie's point, absolutely, there's so much research that shows that we're judged more for how we dress. We're judged differently in interviews. Female CEOs are judged more. We're judged for how we speak. We're judged differently if we get angry versus an angry man is authoritative. An angry woman is hysterical. So none of this is our fault. It's a completely rational feeling to not want to put yourself out there because you get judged to fuck. But we all have to kind of help. It's an unfortunate reality. We have to help each other start to fix that now.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
And
amazing.
Julia, you've got, oh, sorry, Cynthia, go.
It's amazing because, what Jackie and Amy are both, like, they're bringing in this concept of the double bind, right? And women are held to the standard that if we're too caring, then we're too soft. We're not leadership material. And if we're too hard, well, we're just a bitch. So the whole idea that, there's no happy ground, and to find it, much like Amy, I mean, I've been on, over 250 stages myself, 19 countries, and it is absolutely oppressive in terms of going into some of those spaces. To be held account to everything that men are not held to account. They really don't give a shit how you're dressed, or is your makeup perfect? Is your hair good? Do you have the vocal fry in your voice? Like, that's never part of a conversation with a man.
No, I did a talk, which was hilarious, on stage, and I was so used to like having a microphone and I'd never really done the clicker of changing slides, and I was I just kept holding the clicker up like this, and someone said that's the clicker, and I was like, fuck, it's not a microphone, is it? But I literally spent the whole hour, but then I owned it. I kept, after the next time I did it, I went, you know what, I'm going to tell you now, I'm going to spend this whole talk speaking into my clicker, so just go with it. But Julia, on when you on female founders and getting investment and exactly that, the different, where we're held up, the different levels of, and do you see a big difference in the questions asked? So female founders are asked very different questions to male founders by investors. Like, what's your experience on that?
They are, and it's outrageous actually. I mean, like, for women, 2/3 of the questions that they get asked are what are called preventative questions that put you on the back foot. So, for example, how are you going to defend your market share? Okay. Whereas 2/3 of the questions that the guys get asked are promotional. For example, so what's the total addressable market for this business? And if you don't spot it, you can suddenly find yourself being on the back foot, defending yourself and being made smaller, whereas the guys are being lifted up, and it's really shocking. But I think the interesting thing is that female-led businesses deliver double the return on investment than male-led businesses. Double, right? So women need to know that, because we just do a bloody great job when we're building businesses. We fail so much. I mean, 23% of female-led businesses fail versus 34% of male-led businesses. It's huge. So actually the stats, if you look at the cold hard stat, it proves that women-led businesses are better. So I think what we have to do is make sure that in my industry that women know that, because if they don't know that, they just assume that they're going to be no good, and they kind of, make themselves feel small. And this whole point about giving people the voice, it's so important, because the more great examples of trailblazers and people who are doing it in our industries, the better, because then more women can go, oh yeah, I see that, it's possible, I can do that too. And like you, Jackie, I also have a podcast. We all love a podcast. I think actually it is easier than ever for women to have that voice. You can set up a podcast really easily. You can build an Instagram profile or a Facebook group really easily. We didn't used to have these platforms for women's voices. We have them now. We have to use them. And the podcast I have is called, for anyone who can listen to it, it's called Fundraising Stories with Women Entrepreneurs. Emma's been interviewed on there. It's great interview.
Yeah, mine was hilarious.
Yeah, it was great. My challenge is getting more men to listen to it. Again, it's like I want people in the investment community to listen to the stories of women as much as I want female founders to listen to it, because I want it to inspire women, but I want investors to hear the stories so that they start to think. And like at the beginning of this conversation, we start with just questioning ourselves, questioning our own views, thoughts. You have to get more people to do that.
What's your advice on what's the biggest advice you give to sort of female founders on speaking to investors and not being on that back foot?
I think first of all, it's about not letting those stats you read about gender bias become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And if you go into it assuming you're going to be discriminated against, then that's going to be in your head. So that's the first thing, is going in like you say, Emma, kind of not even having that in your mind, just kind of assuming that it's going to be great. When it comes to dealing with the kind of difficult questions you get as a female founder, it's just being on alert. Being on alert to, I'm kind of always contradicting myself, because I don't want you to go in thinking you're going to be discriminated against, but also just being on alert for those little red flags. And if you can spot a question that feels like it's making you get on the defensive, to flip it around to being positive. So if you get asked that question, you know, how are you going to defend market share? You pause, take a breath, and kind of go, well, let me tell you about the market opportunity here. You just flip it. And so you play them at their own game. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you've got to call it out, and that's really hard, isn't it? Like you're saying, like when you spot that, and you kind of go, right, if I actually say, hang on a minute, would you have asked that question to a guy? You're seen as being that kind of moany, bitchy, kind of complaining woman. It's really hard. My view on that is, if you get too much of that, it's a red flag. Walk away, because why the fuck would you want to get with an investor that has got that kind of attitude?
Well, that's it, isn't it? It's that turning around and actually flipping it to go, right. You're kind of interviewing the investor as to whether you want to work with them, rather than going in thinking, oh my God, I need to beg for money. I really need your money, and like I'll do anything you want. I think that's quite a mentality, isn't it, of like founders, especially female founders, like we really need that money, so we'll kind of do anything you ask of us.
But that works, I think, in the corporate environment too. It's, you know, we need to make sure that we're going into environments that are going to support us and that we're going to be comfortable with. And if we don't see that, then we need to choose differently. The market will rectify itself in the end if we do that, if we step into our power and know that we have agency, because we do.
Yeah. There's that, have you all read that Invisible Woman book?
Not yet.
Yeah, you should. It's called Invisible Women. It's really, if you like that, it's that data bias, isn't it? It's like, Amy, you've read it, haven't you? What are your thoughts on it?
It's another reason why I'm angry. I'm just constantly having reasons why I'm angry. And again, like, I think Invisible Women is probably the best book I've read this decade. Bear in mind, we're only in 2021, but because it's based on data, and there's very few things that you can bloody argue with than cold, hard facts. And the whole fact that, like, Invisible Women is about how, you know, public toilets is a perfect example. They're built for men and how men go to the toilet, not for how women go to the toilet and the amount of time they take, which is why there's always massive queues outside women's toilets.
And the doors are so heavy.
Yes, even like airbags are built, and cars are built to save men's lives.
Yeah, seatbelts. Yeah.
Yes, seatbelts. And so I love that. In the work that I do, particularly the DIE stuff, I make it as data-led and unemotional as possible, so that no one can argue with the stuff that I'm saying. And on the subject of stats and men, I saw amazing research, like quite a big study that I shared in social the other day, that found that men are 3 times more emotional in the workplace than women. So men were 3 times more likely to get overtly emotional if people didn't listen to their ideas, if someone took credit for one of their ideas. And it's so interesting that we have this hysterical, emotional, whatever reputation, but actually the numbers say it's the opposite.
It's the men who throw their toys out the pram.
Completely true. But, you know, when you talk stats and hard numbers, I mean, you know, all this crazy idea that I think, you know, here in the EU, I mean, for those that aren't aware, I mean, I grew up in Canada, even though I was born here in Britain. And, you know, so the realization that here in this area, you know, we're setting a target of 30%, you know, women up in senior roles. And it's like, really? Like, this is 2021 and we're only shooting for 30%? I realize the target's not there, and it's not. 23% in North America is where women face within the leadership roles. And it's even worse in other industries. I mean, my daughter's gone into law. And did you know that right now there are more women in law than there are men, but yet only 4% ever make partner? Junior partner, senior partner, 4%. So that means they're lucky if they make associate, which is crazy. Yeah. Like this just is totally out of balance. And we need to stop talking about these I believe in targets. If you know, again, the business, you know, kind of phrase of what gets measured gets managed. If we want to make sure that things change, then we need some kind of targets in order to move towards. But I mean, let's remove 30%. Like if it's not 50%, then that's what we need to push for. I mean, gosh, we've been at this for 50 years. Enough is enough.
If not, and but on that, because I always say I'm a big sort of in that we've got to hit it at grassroots. You've got to hit it at, like, as parents, the messaging. Like, my kids are 6, 4, and 2, and the 4 and 2 are girls, and I have to stop myself sometimes. There's just an automatic way, and that's when you realize really how strong that bias and that messaging is. If someone like me still has to stop myself using certain language on the girls compared to the boys. So do you think that this for all of you, that your experience, like growing up, and how that messaging, how important is that message to change them? Because it's all very well saying we want them in as directors and 50-50 on boards, but if we don't change that confidence and that belief from when they're this big arc, is it ever going to change? Are we going to be stuck in this like cycle?
Yeah, you've got to start at the beginning. I totally believe that. I mean, I was one of 3 girls, and I had a dad who absolutely made me believe that I could be anything that I wanted. And I think, particularly for women, the influence of your father is really important. Yeah. So that has made a huge difference for me. And he's always, you know, he died when I was 15, but he's always in my ear, you know, always. But I've got a boy and a girl, teenagers, and yeah, I have to question myself all the time, especially as they're teenagers and starting to do teenagery things. And, you know, what do you allow a boy to do versus a girl? And I'm questioning myself. It's hard. So every one of us owes that to the next generation, to question always. Yeah.
Well, Jackie, what do you think on well, your background, but also being black and female?
Well, it's funny because Julia, my dad, 3 of girls. So my dad was very much like, you know, you can be anything you want. And I actually sometimes think that you know, dads can be the ones that, I mean, providing they're obviously good dads, but they can push you more. Like my dad pushed me more than my mum in terms of, like, you know, aspire for this, do this. If someone says this, then turn around. So I've always been taught to kind of disrupt the status quo. Like you know, you enter an organization and, you know, you look at things that you can change and empower other people. But I don't have children, but I think for me, it's more small things like, you know, me and my boyfriend, for example, or if I do certain things and I think, oh, is that ladylike? But then I'm like, he does really gross things. Like, why am I? And I'm sure he's not sitting there.
What is ladylike?
Yeah, he's just like, whatever. So it's also things like that, you know, and being told, like, you know, how you should behave and being hyper polite and all these things that, even, for example, when I'm working and the type of language I will use when I'm sending an email, and I know I'm right, but I'll be like, is that okay? Do you mind? Is it okay if I, and also to unlearn these things that I guess we've been taught and conditioned to be like hyper polite and pleasant, and, you know, this kind of second guessing yourself, and it's like, actually, no, I'm right. So again, I think everything starts at home, doesn't it? It's like you want to be the change that you wish to see in the world. So for me, it's like, I interrogate my thoughts quite a lot. So if I am doing certain things, and sometimes I will miss it because it's so embedded, but when I can catch it, I will be like, okay, well, what makes me think that, and where does that come from? And just trying to unlearn. I think it's lifetime's work to unlearn this stuff, but it's not impossible. And it's the same with racial bias as well. You know, I just refuse to be labeled. I refuse to be silenced. I am who I am. And that's it. I'm not going to let that define me. You know, my favorite quote is like, if you live by people's opinions, you'll die by their decisions. And I just don't want to, you know, I don't care about how people see me. I just think for me, it's my relationship with myself. And what's important for me is laying a foundation, you know, and empowering, you know, other women wherever they come from. That's my main goal, you know. So if people want to label me, then great. I don't care anymore.
Yeah. What about you, Amy?
I think I'm one of 3 girls as well. I wasn't that. And my dad did all the housework in our house. He did, like, literally, he did all the cooking, all the housework. I think there's a pattern here, but I think We do. I think the biggest problem, and I don't know how to solve it, only 52% of women in the UK consider themselves to be feminist. I think feminism, well, it has loads of problems. Historically, it was too white. It was too exclusive. I think feminism has a branding problem. I think feminism has an accessibility problem as well. And for as long as only 52% of women consider themselves to be feminist, i.e. believe in the equality of women, the social, regulatory, economic equality of women, we will never fix this. There will always be half the population that completely adhere to traditional gender roles. And honestly, I swear to God, I don't know how to fix it. Yeah.
No, actually, they internalize misogynism in women. I've always, Mum said that to me when I was little. She said, "You'll go far in life. You'll be fine. Your problem will always be other women." She was so freaking right. That's, you know what I mean? It's like, in my experience, it's always been other women, and that's, you know what I mean? We can sit here, people automatically assume you hate men. I'm like, no, actually, if I have to pick a sex that I want to slap most of the time, it's other women. But Cynthia, you've got a unique, what's your experience? Because obviously, very unique, growing up a boy and then trans.
Well, believe it or not, I have 2 sisters, so now I'm part of 3 sisters. But yeah, you know what? For me, the journey was realizing the difference of, quote, social programming, you know, as a male, and then up to the point of what was experienced. And quite honestly, I mean, my son's 27, my daughter's 23, and as I went through exploring my own sense of self and awareness, I apologized to my daughter, and I sat both of my kids down, and we had a very frank discussion about a lot of this. And, you know, I'm happy to say that my daughter is an amazing, strong woman, and she's very much her own person, and that's fabulous. And I just want her to simply know that I'm here to support her. But she's very much her own person. And for my son, it's about raising his awareness of the privilege that he carries and how to make sure that he opens it up for others and that he creates that space. So, yeah, I mean, I went from awareness to apologizing to teaching. And, you know, that's one of the things I love is I have 50 years of male experience that I love to download into with women so that they can use it to empower themselves going forward, because they never had that experience in teaching. Men don't need to know. In fact, I don't know they're fully grasping the complexity of being a woman and the world that we live in, and why, quite honestly, if you read the studies, we make better managers and executives because we can multitask, because we are so neurodiverse. The fact is we can actually perform those much more complex roles better. So because we're not that aggressive kind of warrior, I'm going after, I'm doing this, that we can actually bring in every side and we can actually pull everyone together in order to move forward because we're much better at that process. So yeah, just learning that whole process, it has really been a eye-opening and growing experience that, you know, I still learn something every day.
That's what it's about, isn't it? To keep that open mind. So I always say, just stay curious, ask questions, questions. Used to do my parents nut when I was little. Question everything, and disagree with everything. Like, yes, I can't. It's exhausting in my head every day, even now. Questioning everything just exhausts me. But just finally, before we go away, I thought we could speak for hours and hours and hours. Just all of you, just a bit, if you were sat with your like 20-year-old self opposite or 18-year-old self, what would be your one bit of advice to them? Julia, go.
Oh no, I thought you came to me first. I mean, I think it would be the same advice that I was given by my dad, which is basically you can achieve anything that you want to, and you know there's going to be challenges along the way. Don't let them stop you. Find a way around it because the world needs what you have to bring. So go for it.
Cool. Amy?
Oh, I feel like mine's quite depressing. I basically lived my 20s entirely based on what men thought of me and how they spoke to me and how they judged me and what I could do to impress them. I would tell my 20-year-old self, fucking stop it. Stop it. And care about, Jackie's earlier as well, care about what you think and not what makes you attractive to the opposite sex. That's the advice I'd give.
Yeah, I'm with you. I gave too much of a shit in my 20s. Jackie.
I would say dare to be different. Know that your voice matters and your voice is important. Shout from the rooftops. Everywhere you go, you know, make a difference, and you just existing is making a difference, you know. And dump your ex. Dump your boyfriend, sorry.
Okay, cool. Cynthia, your final bit.
I would say that it's okay to be yourself, like trust yourself. And yeah, I was married at 20, so that was a very
we don't trust our female intuition enough, do we? Our gut.
No.
We override.
No.
If I look back, most of the mistakes I've made, I've known and I've still done it. And my gut initially, my initial thing is like, don't, and then I'll be talked out of it, or I'll talk myself round. And then you look back going, I knew it, freaking knew it. So
the gut never lies.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you all very much. That was really interesting and amazing. So thank you.